Thank you very much, Lisa. Hello, everybody. And I get the great honor of welcoming our guest today, Dr. Debbie Almontaser, who, with the IRI, we came into contact with, and we are very grateful for the connection. Dr. Debbie, as she is affectionately known, is was a speaker for a film that she was also in. Some of you may have seen this film through the IRI or other places, called American Muslim by filmmaker Adam Zucker. And Dr. Debbie had a role in that, and actually a very powerful role in that, watching her speak if you have seen the film. And if you haven't seen the film, there are opportunities around the country for some opportunities to see that. And our panel discussion is also posted on the YouTube page for CTS if you're interested in hearing Dr. Debbie talk further after today. But we're so grateful because we got this connection and this relationship built with Dr. Debbie. And so grateful for her and her work and her agreeing to come and be a part of a Wednesday reflection with us here for the full CTS community. So thank you, Dr. Debbie. And I will let you know as soon as I pull up the right window, Zoom Life, that Dr. Debbie's title today is When They Build Walls, We Build Bridges. And she has mentioned about the last 4 years being very difficult for immigrants and refugees seeking refuge, obviously due to the Muslim and refugee ban. And so we're very happy to hear about what Dr. Debbie has been doing and encourage us all to do and is continuing to do to pressure Congress to pass the No Ban Act. And I actually just learned recently that President Biden has not yet lifted the refugee numbers yet either. And I don't know, Dr. Debbie, if that's something that you also will address, but he has very much been a proponent of lifting the refugee numbers in the United States, and that has not happened yet. So that was a bit of a shock for me. But so we look very forward to this conversation with you to address what we can continue to do to combat Islamophobia and creating more inclusive representation. Dr. Debbie Almontaser, and I'm hoping that I'm pronouncing that right. Correct me later if I'm not, as I have always just called you Dr. Debbie, is an internationally recognized award-winning educator, entrepreneur, speaker, and authority on cross-cultural understanding. She's also the author of Leading While Muslim. She's an influential community leader and a founder and CEO of Bridging Cultures Group Incorporated. That is a for-profit business that provides professional development and coaching for folks. And she's also known for her leadership role in organizing the historic Yemeni Bodega Strike Rally and the I Am Muslim Too rally. So we are very happy to have you, Dr. Debbie. And just so everyone knows about the shape of it, Dr. Debbie is going to talk for 20 or 25 minutes or so, and then we will engage with in conversation with her. So I hope that you will have questions or thoughts that we can take advantage of Dr. Debbie's expertise with and engage with her afterwards. And I think that's it, Dr. Debbie. I think I'm done talking. We're so happy to have you here, and I'm going to pass it over to you.
Thank you so much, Kim, and thank you so much, Lisa, for inviting me. It's really been wonderful to work with you and get the opportunity to meet so many amazing people in your network, because the only way that we can actually build a world that is filled with respect and justice and liberty for all is through this kind of work that we do. You know, the pandemic has been one of the most horrific things that has happened to man in all of our history. At the same time, I believe that there is also opportunity when a conflict happens or an issue happens, and that opportunity is now we've leveled the playing field and have actually been able to communicate with one another more than we have in any other time in history through the internet, through Zoom, and all of the other outlets that have really let us, get into the homes of people across the world. So just want to take that opportunity to thank God for these blessings and all of the horrific things that we have seen over the last year. When we talked about, my coming on and reflecting, this entire, last 6 months for me have been filled with reflection. As Kim has alluded to the Muslim ban, AKA travel ban, that Donald Trump actually signed as an executive order in 2017 really was one of the most devastating things that I have personally experienced in all my years as an adult and as an American. And seeing the impact that it had directly on the Yemeni American community, which I belong to, and seeing the impact that it had, where families were being separated, not only by borders, but by legislation that basically was racist and bigoted in every form that we can imagine, and totally annihilating and disrespecting the American values that this nation was founded on. And so when I started to get calls from my community that very night on January 27th, when it was signed, the panic, the fear in people's voices were just, it made me tremble inside. And at the same time, I had to show leadership and strength in order for them not to break down and really just fall apart. And so having, be able to do that for myself, for my community was a huge challenge, but I drew strength through, my faith and through, knowing that we were going to be okay, because it wasn't just me who was upset in my community, but the entire American population across the country was outraged. And within hours of that executive order being signed, people hit the streets, rallies across the country, people rushing to airports. It was one of the most incredible moments that I could say I am proud to have lived through and have the opportunity to see, our communities coming together regardless of their race, their religion, their sexual orientation. What they saw was wrong and they stood up. And so, in those very days, in every airport across the country, it was the most uplifting thing for me to see. And, the next day I had met with my community, specifically the Yemeni American community, because the language barriers, the educational barriers, people didn't really know what the implications of this ban was. And so immediately, after speaking with lawyers within the 24 hours, I was able to give them this information and let them know that they should tell people not to travel. If you have a green card, do not travel. If a family member just received a visa and they're supposed to be traveling to the US, to tell them not to travel, because literally what they were doing was actually sending people back from the airports, detaining them for hours and sending them back. And as much as we fought in the airports, the lawyers, the activists, we were able to get some people through, others not. It was it's one of the most devastating times and shameful times in our country's history. And so, after helping them see this, they all felt very vulnerable, the Yemeni American community. And this vulnerability really led them to feel like we have to do something. This is our home, and the first question that I was asked by many of them, does this mean we'll never see our family? Does this mean we have to leave the United States? And my first response to them was, you're not going to see your family right now. But this does not mean that you leave the United States. You're an American citizen and you have every right to be here, and you're going to fight to be reunited with your family. And so just giving them that hope made them feel like, okay, I have to do something. I have to make my voice heard. And that was really what I had instilled in them that following day was, you have to speak up. You have to show your presence. And this is your country and you have to fight for it. And so within 24 hours, someone called me, one of the bodega owners, and said, everybody is upset because each and every one of them has a family. We're 30, people that got together for dinner, and they want to do a strike. And I said to him, this is brilliant. And they had asked him to actually call me and get my approval if it was something that they should do. And I love the idea. And I said, yes, absolutely. Let's make this happen. Shut down 1,000 stores. I will help you get press. I will help you find a location. And we have to get everybody to a public area to let their voices get heard. And so they shut down 1,000 stores. Within 4 days, we organized this incredible rally where we had over 6,000 people come out. We had press that were already covering it the day before, press that were covering it the day of. It actually trended on Twitter on the day of February 2nd, 2017. And we had over 40 elected officials who dropped everything and came out. It was just incredible. And you can actually find footage of the Yemeni bodega strike online. There's also a small video that was done featuring me telling the story. But one of the most profound things that was happening at that rally, and I still get goosebumps when I think about it, was the most popular chant at that rally was USA, USA. And I was like, I had all of these brilliant chants, right? That you want to like chant. And I could not get them into it. And I then said to myself, you know what? Let me just put these aside and let them chant. And, for some people who were there, they're like, why are they just chanting USA? And then one of my Yemeni friends and colleagues, and who's very, integrated in the community, he said to me, he said, this is their message of this is our home and we're not going anywhere. And then that was it. That was the mantra of that rally. It was just so beautiful to hear that over and over and over again. And really was the moment that had awoken this sleeping giant. Like the Yemeni American community in New York City was never known, never heard, never seen. People in neighborhoods didn't even know that their local bodega was owned by a Yemeni until that very strike. Maybe 7 or 8 of the elected officials that came and spoke started telling the story of their local bodega. And some of them saying, I have to go back and ask them if they're Yemeni. But it was just really, really beautiful. That day, they shut down for 8 hours. People actually started, sticking money under their door to help them and support them in solidarity. They put out flowers. They put up beautiful posters saying, all are welcome here. You're our neighbors. We're not going to let this happen. And then we had a lot of allies who came out to that rally. So in the weeks after we came to the conclusion that this community needed leadership, we formed the Yemeni American Merchants Association, which has been fighting on their behalf on immigration, on policy, everything that we saw the community did not have. We felt the necessity to bring to the community. And since then, this organization has now become nationally known, in the halls of Capitol Hill. From all of the congressional leaders that we've reached out to help reunite families. Over the course of the 4 years, we were able to reunite close to 22 families. It's a small number, but it's a victorious number given the circumstances of this ban. And the fact that, Trump allowed people to come if they had a waiver and if they passed the criteria, which there was no criteria for this waiver. But we were able to crack the code and get a lot of families to be able to come to the United States. In addition to that, we filed a lawsuit with the ACLU, International Rescue Committee, and a whole host of organizations that filed against the Muslim ban. We kept turning out people to court hearings. It was just an incredible moment of solidarity and advocacy that, we all brought together and fought. And so over the last couple of years, with partners on a national level, we came to the conclusion that immigration is something that has always been decided by Congress. And what we wanted to make sure that there will be no president in future history that would ever tamper with immigration. And that's why the No Ban Act is such a critical policy that we must get Congress and the Senate to pass. Thank you, Kim, for actually mentioning it earlier, because right now this is the top of the bill for all advocates across the country to make sure that we are getting them to basically sign it into law to not allow any president to tamper with immigration. Now, where we are today with President Biden, as you all know, he promised that on day one, he was going to repeal the ban, and that he did. It was, an executive order repealing it. But what he actually announced that very day was that there was going to be a 45-day period where he wanted all the agencies to report on the impact of the ban and come up with some recommendations. So the recommendations that were released about 10 days ago, basically, and before I give what the report provided, when he announced the repeal, he had also announced that anyone from that day forward who was applying for a visa would be able to get the visa if they passed all the requirements for entry. So that was actually a great thing for all the new incoming people who were actually going to get interviews as of January 20th and forward. Now, for the people in the last 4 years, what he had said was they were going to allow each and every case to call their embassy, to call their consulate, and ask them to reevaluate their case. And so we immediately let everyone know that we were in touch with, and we did social media, videos and what have you, informing everyone that they must let their consulate where they actually filed and got the rejection to reevaluate their case. Now, what he did is he said, in the meantime, I want, this 45-day for a report to be generated. So the report was generated, it was released, as I mentioned earlier. And in that report, they announced that they were not going to include the diversity visa winners. Now, you all know that back in the 60s, Congress actually created the diversity lottery for countries across the globe to diversify the United States. And the original number was 100,000 a year. Trump brought it down to 55,000. And unfortunately, all of the countries that were in the Muslim ban were not permitted to actually enter the United States. There was a very small number of people that were actually given visas. How it happened, we don't know. But there were over 9,000 people over the course of the 4 years that did not get visas, who actually won this, lottery system, right? This is like a ticket to the American dream. Now, for the people in Yemen, Yemen there's a civil war going on. There's a humanitarian crisis going on. For all of those people who received the lottery visa, basically the lottery ticket, they had to leave Yemen because there is no embassy, no American consulate or embassy in Yemen because of the war and everything that's happening. They sold their homes, they sold their jewels, they sold their cars, they borrowed money from family, from neighbors, and they picked up and went to the country that the United States told them to go get processed. They get there, and then sadly, 98% of them got rejected because of the Muslim ban. Of the number of people that actually traveled from Yemen within those 4 years, sadly, there were a couple of them who took their lives because they couldn't go back home. They owed so much money, and they knew they would never be able to pay people back. The other person, the family was discouraging him from going and didn't think it was going to happen, and he just couldn't face his family and took his life. So the impact has just been incredibly horrific all around. So right now we are pressuring Congress in the No Ban Act to include some kind of stipulation to include the diversity lottery winners for the last several years to be able to enter the United States. Now, it's only 9,000 people, right? It's not a huge number. And so the other thing that President Biden has not yet done is actually lift the cap. There are now back and forth conversations that it might be lifted to 80 versus to the 100,000 that it initially was. We don't know why they want to go to 80 from, and not to the original number. And then the other thing that has not been yet determined is the number of refugees being able to come to the United States. And you know, the United States has been a place of refuge for people who have had to flee their countries, you know, for a host of reasons. And the fact right now that people are in limbo is just really, really devastating. So I can assure you that all of the organizations, the humanitarian organizations, the immigrant rights organizations, the civil rights organizations are on top of this day and night. And the one thing that you know, we all right here on this Zoom call can do is make sure that our congressional leaders vote for this. So you can actually call your congressional leader and say to them, when it's time for the No Ban Act to be voted, I want you to vote it in. This is the beauty of democracy. And you know, these people are people that we put into office and have the right to demand that of them. So anywhere that I go, wherever I'm speaking, I'm always reminding people about the No Ban Act and how we all have to act and make sure that our congressional leaders pass it. So, you know, this has been the biggest issue that, you know, that I and other, you know, immigrant groups are working on. I had mentioned, you know, the creation of the Yemeni American Merchants Association as a nonprofit social service providing support for the community. We also realized that this community needed a political apparatus. And so just last night, we launched Yama Action, which is a C4 that will actually allow them to engage in policy and legislation, as well as to vet and endorse candidates who serve their interest. So it was a really well-attended event, and I can't wait for us to be able to organize and mobilize this sleeping giant. You know, as I mentioned earlier, the community was atypical in getting involved in politics or social issues, but now that has entirely changed. And this sleeping giant is awake and is just really, really fighting, you know, to be a part of this country and to make sure that this country, you know, upholds the values that it was created to welcome all. I think I'll stop there, Kim, unless you want me to just talk more about some of the other things that I've been doing along the lines of creating inclusive representation, you know, in our government. One of the things that we have pressured President Biden was to make sure that, you know, this administration was going to be reflective of all, you know, Americans. And so we've had a couple of appointments, but we still want some more senior appointments, you know, that will go through the Senate. There was only one person so far that they've identified. We want him to work on designating Arab Americans as minorities, because right now, Arab Americans in the United States are considered white, but they don't have the privilege of white people. They're facing discrimination in housing, you know, in services, at the workplace, and sadly, and even in contracting with city, state, and federal government. And so, you know, in the aftermath of 9/11, this community has really faced a great deal of backlash and discrimination. And we really need to assess that and help them understand that this community is just as marginalized and a minority community that needs, you know, that kind of support and help. And lastly, just, you know, with the pandemic, and I'm sure that we've all seen this in our local, you know, communities, food insecurity has been the biggest issue across the country. And what we've seen in New York and in other cities where I've talked to other people is that we don't have religiously sensitive food for people. And so we've been fighting really hard for halal food, making sure that it is being provided by people who are trained and who understand how to handle it, prepare it, and that it's being purchased from, you know, halal vendors that are certified. So this has been a huge fight for us in New York City. You know, right now, my husband and I have been fighting to ensure that there is food for Ramadan. And we've yet to lock, you know, the city to ensure us that they will have, you know, the capability of serving food for 30 days. We had to fight for it last year. And it's just really, really unfortunate. And then also, the learning curve of them knowing what is halal and what isn't. And, the vegetarian option should not be considered halal because it's not. So there is so much to do. And I hope that, in your local areas that you will plug in and speak to your local Muslim neighbors and see what's happening. And, if there are, companies and nonprofits that are actually, looking at these needs, because, in New York City, 22% of US Muslims reside in New York City. That's 1 million Muslims, right? And we've yet to figure this out. And even with all the stimulus packages that we've received, it has not, it's just been a drop in the bucket. And so yeah, so I'll stop there, and I'll be happy to answer questions and talk with everyone. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Debbie. That was for the sharing of the story and, understanding more about the Yemeni community and the way that the ban in particular affected that community. When the ban went in place, we were actually planning a conference here at CTS, a conference on combating Islamophobia and anti-Muslim bigotry. And it was a 2-day conference. And I was connected with a local artist here in Chicago, Sarvan Hagigi, and she was going to be coming. She's Iranian, and she was going to be coming and doing an interactive art display while she was here at the conference. So she was to be basically painting the walls of one of our chapels with the Farsi word for love just over and over again, and people were going to be invited to come in and sit and watch and meditate while she was doing that. And she actually was caught up in the Muslim ban. She had been in Australia visiting family and flew back to O'Hare at the very time that the ban went into place. And she was detained in O'Hare for like 4 days and, reaching out to us of all people. I mean, she's, has family and friends or whatever, but I don't know if I'm going to be able to make the conference. I'm here. I don't know what to do. I'm talking to my attorneys. So it felt very, very personal to all of us at CTS because we had such a connection with Sarvan. And then, of course, she went on to really be championing, like you, in communities here, pushing back against the Muslim ban and giving a face to it. Like, I think that's the power of story in all of these is so important because, yeah, the families who were impacted, and Sarvan went on to give birth to her first child during this, and her parents were unable to meet their grandbaby. And, all of us can relate to those tragedies that were inflicted on people for absolutely no reason other than just pure bigotry. So I just wanted to note that I think the story of, the Yemeni community in bodegas banding together and saying we're going to oppose this and make it public so that people understand what's going on, and then the solidarity that inspires then as a result. And though we weren't able to overturn it under the Trump administration, overturning on day one of Biden is, I think, emblematic of the success of that type of work, of getting the word out there for people who aren't from those impacted countries to be able to imagine the pain and suffering that was being caused. So I commend you for that work and also for sharing the story and for being with us here today. So I'll pause there. That was my long just comment, and see if folks have questions or comments to share with Dr. Debbie.
I would just love to hear, Dr. Debbie, and you alluded a little bit to this. We hear so much during this last year of this pandemic, of the pandemic hitting Black and Brown communities especially hard, and the pain that is coming at an extreme rate for these communities. And I just wonder if you want to address a little bit specifically about the immigrant community as well in New York with this, and any takeaways or anything that you might suggest, or if you just want to reflect on that for us.
Yeah, absolutely. This past year, the number of fatalities that New York City experienced was actually the highest number. Was actually in Black and Brown communities in the Bronx and in Brooklyn, East New York, Brownsville area. And the reason is because these are underserved, underrepresented communities, forgotten communities that really did not get the adequate health care that they needed, did not get the priority that they needed. And one of the things that occurred last year was there were a lot of medical doctors and nurses in hospitals who actually came out publicly and talked about that even within the hospital system, medical doctors were making the decision who they should save and who they shouldn't based on race. And I mean, when I saw that, it was absolutely devastating to see that. And you know it happened because some of these people were uninsured and a host of other things. And so there was a huge outcry in New York. We called out the city, we called out the governor, the mayor, and really said that something has to change with this. And so um, throughout the course of this happening, and then we saw the horrific brutal murder of George Floyd, and the Black Lives Matter movement organizing and mobilizing, and that just lifted that up to another level. And so as we started, as I continued to monitor this situation, and particularly within the Muslim community, one of the communities that had been hit the hardest within the Muslim diaspora is actually the West African community. So I actually, in the last spring, started calling some of the leaders just to check in and see how they were doing. And actually, one of the leaders there, who I've known for a good 15 years, he said to me, thank you for calling us, because we've just been struggling with this. And as he was talking to me, I said, well, how's your family? And, it's so hard sometimes for me to actually talk about it. He said to me, I lost 30 extended family members to COVID right here in New York City. Um, so can you imagine, your cousins, your nephews? It was really, really painful, to hear that number, 30. And I said to him, I said, like, how did you guys cope? And he said to me, he said, it was one of the most challenging thing. We couldn't even bury everybody. The burial rites, preparing people, and when the pandemic hit New York, I don't know how much people were able to see, but the morgues in hospitals, the New York City morgues were not enough. Hospitals actually had to get refrigerated trucks outside of their buildings. Like, there was one hospital that my husband and I drove by, and it had literally around the whole entire perimeter, you know, trucks, freezer trucks that were parked there, the trailers, the all the way around, and then on the other side of the street, all the way around. It was horrific. It was horrific. Also, the funeral parlors couldn't even meet the demand. Like, there were people who were they couldn't figure out what to do, and they didn't have the money to get these trailers, right? Because you had to fend for yourself. And a couple of funeral homes in the Muslim community actually took footage of what it looked like in their funeral homes. They had bodies on the floor. They had bodies on tables. They everywhere. It was just so devastating to see that. And this wasn't just inherent in the Muslim community. Also, the Jewish community was facing this. In other communities, like New York was not prepared for this moment of tragedy, and to be able to do what it needed to do. And so when he shared this with me, I was just I was so emotional, because I saw what was already happening. And then to hear him say this to me. And right now, till this day, we still have bodies that are on this island. I'm forgetting the name of the island, where they actually put bodies that are unclaimed, because of just people not being able to put everyone to rest. And so these are like the issues. And you know, some of the Muslim funeral parlors had to do emergency fundraising from the community to get a freezer trailer outside their facility. So, you know, it was just, it's still something that we are all still feeling the trauma from. And the thing right now that I think, you know, that I think all of us can relate to on this Zoom is that we are seeing a lot of people who are starting to think that, you know, COVID is over. It's not over. You know, yes, it's not on the news every moment, and you're seeing all those fatalities. You know, the government is choosing not to, you know, put it out there. And when I say government, I'm not talking about President Biden, but I'm talking about more on the local level. Like now, New York City has decided not to have their daily press conferences about this. Because they don't want to further the alarm. But what we've seen is, you know, Governor Cuomo right now is under attack because there were, you know, numbers of people that passed away that were not, you know, disclosed to the public, among other things that he's you know, he's done, unfortunately, and maybe resigning soon. But we have to remain vigilant. You know, mask wearing is essential. And the fact that we can't get everybody vaccinated, you know, like right now in my household, my husband meets the age, my mother-in-law meets the age, but I don't meet the age to get vaccinated. So now, you know, I'm the one vulnerable and they're okay. So it's just, it's really unfortunate that we're not able to remedy this situation faster than we had hoped. So I'm sorry, I feel like I just went on a tangent there, Kim.
No, not at all. Thank you for that.
No, absolutely.
Dr. Debbie, as you're talking about the impact of COVID disproportionately on communities here, so also here in Chicago is very much that way. And I see my colleague Brian Smith is on this call, and I'm wondering, Brian, so we were able, Dr. Debbie, to get some funding from the Luce Foundation, sort of pass through funding to try to get support for communities that were inordinately affected here. And I was just thinking, as you were talking about the ways that faith communities can be integral to trying to provide hope and support in these times. So I don't know, Brian, it might be helpful for you to share a little bit about that ongoing project.
Yes, let me say Dr. Almontaser.
Almontaser.
Yes.
Yes.
Two things that you said resonate with me. Number one of my constituents is actually owns a funeral home, and he shared with me that he had to order a trailer to take care of the deceased that he was working with, and so I was astonished, and he had a small business, and then secondly, one of our Muslim leaders that's a part of the cohort that Lisa is speaking of shared with me that they had a small enterprise where they distributed halal meat to their constituents. And so I was interested in what you were saying about making sure that we try to kind of accommodate people with special dietary needs. But what Lisa was referring to is a program that we started called Strengthening Our Leaders last summer. And we received funds to be able to support faith leaders on the south side of Chicago. And we were very deliberate about ensuring that we had Muslim, Jewish, and various Christian leaders and any other leaders that would be available, but those were the most prominent on the south side of Chicago. And so we've continued to caucus, we've continued to meet, and we formed what we call the Black Faith Leader Collective. And interestingly enough, all of the faith leaders happen to be African American in this case that we're constantly working with. And it's one of the most dynamic and exciting opportunities because even though we provided services as a part of that grant, as far as technology support so that people could improve their virtual worship capabilities, and we provided counseling services, the biggest opportunity identified by the faith leaders was the fact that they could come together. And they said that this was an opportunity for them to realize that they were not alone. And that alone was enough for the program. And so because of that, they said, we don't want to stop caucusing. We want to make sure that we come together. We prayed all sorts of prayers at every gathering. So depending on who was there, we had a Christian prayer, we had a Muslim prayer, we had a Jewish prayer, and we were comfortable with each other. And we respected each other for our backgrounds. And I'm really excited about what you're presenting. And I'm hoping maybe we could continue and maybe you can come and we can share with the collective, because I think we have a common interest and a common goal. So I don't want to monopolize the presentation, but I just want you to know that I'm encouraged just by hearing things. And I want you to know that other people have experienced similar things. And so we stand with you. And we may not understand your specific experience, but we've had similar experiences.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. That's really, really important. And I think one of the things that we also have to do, as you were speaking, is we have to find ways to channel all of this emotion and, one, taking care of ourselves, right? Taking care of the caretakers. And so I think the work that you're talking about is really important. And then also working outside of our own professions. And so one of the things that I'm proud to share with you all, and I'll share with you the information if you're interested to attend, is because my work is very broad. Someone in my network introduced me to a doctor who works at Mount Sinai, who himself, came to New York last year on March 20th, started at Mount Sinai Hospital, and then COVID hit. He saw, the devastation of what was happening in his hospital and across the city, and then went to a conference this past October and was really moved to doing something. And so he was connected to me. He told me about his idea, and we looked to see if New York City had anything of this sort in New York City, and they don't. And now he is actually going to be launching on March 24th, an organization which I am helping him develop called Our Health NYC, that will be doing educational webinars in linguistically and culturally sensitive manner for all of the communities that I talked about earlier that were just left on the wayside and nobody tended to or cared for. And then in addition to that, provide remote health monitoring. There were so many people through the pandemic that could have been spared had they not left their home to go see a doctor, go to the hospital, especially, older seniors who have pre-existing conditions. And so we assessed to see if New York City had anything of this sort, and they don't. And now he's talking with major companies that are actually going to partner with him to provide remote health monitoring for the uninsured and undocumented in New York City, right? These are the people that were really hit the hardest by COVID in communities of color. And so, to see this idea, an idea come into fruition and now become an organization is really incredible. The launch is going to be on March 24th at 11 a.m. Kim, I'll send you the information. And if any of you are interested to log in and just listen to it, our hope is to get this to other cities that may not have this kind of service, to be, replicated. We will share the template. We just want people to start, we have to take our health into our own hands. And that's what this pandemic has taught us. And we have to think out of the box and figure out, and the people who can get this message out the most powerfully about this project is actually faith communities, right? Houses of worship, see people and meet with people on a weekly basis and see the most vulnerable in their communities, that just simply telling them about our Health NYC can save a life.
That's really outstanding, Dr. Debbie.
Yeah.
Thank you for that. And if you share that information with me, I'll share it with the folks here at CTS. And yes, we should look and see about something like that in Chicago as well. So I would just love to open it up if there's just one final question maybe before we wrap it up today.
Notice that Shelley, I think, has her hand raised.
Oh, sorry, Shelley.
Yeah.
All yours.
I just wanted to, I'm wondering if you could say more about the no ban bill, and if you have found that you've got some support on from both Republicans and Democrats for that bill, or what the status is going into that vote.
Sure, absolutely. So where we sit with it now, we do have majority support, right? Because it was Democrats who actually brought it to, to the floor a couple of years ago. We were not able to because, the Democrats didn't have the majority. Now we do. And also in the Senate. However, right now, as I mentioned earlier, what we're trying to do is add additional, things to it that will seal it to make sure that once it's passed, there is all the safety mechanisms that we need to have are included. And so, ensuring that, the refugee cap is lifted, right? Ensuring that the diversity visa lottery winners, that number goes back up. And then also a couple of other things that I can't think of, off the top of my head to share with you. But again, to just make it bulletproof, that nobody can undo it. And that's why it's critical for all of us to engage our congressional leaders and then our senators once it gets to the floor with them to ensure that they pass it. The Biden administration, started off on a good foot, and they do have a lot of challenges with everything. They have a lot to clean up after Trump, right? I can't find any other words. And so they're only going to do as much as they can, and also try to meet all of the other promises that they have made to communities. And that's why it's really, really critical to not forget the role that Congress and the Senate play, because they have an important role, especially when it comes to immigration policy and legislation. So I hope that answers your question.
And just to dovetail, can I ask one more quick question, then I'll stop talking? Do you know when, do we have any idea of when Biden is lifting the refugee ceiling, the cap on that? Has there been any talk about that?
It's still in discussion. That hasn't been yet finalized. I know that they are very eager to help families that basically were separated at the border. You all remember what that was like, children being ripped off, from their parents and what have you. So a lot of that right now is still in progress. It hasn't really reached a lot. There hasn't been a lot of press on it, but we know from the advocates that are working on this that this is a priority, and we're hoping, to see that this is going to, happen sooner. So there really hasn't been any information on that, and we're monitoring it. And I think the one thing that I have to say that has been positive, when they released the report, and they brought up the issue of the diversity visa winners not being included as getting relief. The ACLU and other national advocates put out statements. And we did hear from people working in the White House that, the press statements expressing disappointment were really taken into serious consideration. And so we're hoping that we'll be able to move the needle and get them to provide advanced parole for these diversity visa winners. So what is advanced parole? It means that they can permit them to come to the United States because of humanitarian crisis. And then once they're here, they're given the chance to actually change their immigration status. So either apply for TPS or apply, for permanent residence. And so that is right now what we're pushing with Congresswoman Yvette Clarke and Linda Sanchez, who are actually the two that are chairing the new immigration committee in Congress.
Thank you for all that information on the status of the upcoming bills, and really just for an engaging conversation that I feel equipped on, sort of the national level with action steps to take and things to be watching for, but also the reminder of the importance of how we work together locally and in solidarity with one another, and how it's those local avenues that get people involved that end up leading to the groundswells that prompt the change at the national level. So again, Dr. Debbie, thank you for being with us. This was a wonderful time to be together and reflect. And you shared this at the beginning, but the pandemic has strangely opened up worlds for us to be able to, have you in New York City joining us here today. And we have people from all over our community is wide flung. We're not all here in Chicago. So these opportunities to come together are very, very meaningful. So I thank you again for being with us.
You're very welcome.